Hey everyone, Paula Aponte here with eXp Realty and Team BC in Lakeland, Florida. And I wanted to do this quick video for you to talk to you about how to write a contract here in Florida if you are representing a buyer. Typically, I would say 99% of the time, we use what's called a as-is FAR contract, right? Buyer contract. And I'm not an attorney. I don't change anything, any lingo, neither should you. And I'm not here to advise about too many of the specifics today, but what I am here to do is just give you the raw basics that if you've never ever written a contract before, you have absolutely nobody to reach out to, and you're like, how the heck do I write a contract? I'm going to show you how I do it. Okay. So again, this is just the basics. So let me go ahead and share my screen for you. All right. All righty. So currently you see this. Hopefully this has changed. Let's see. Okay, so we should see this. Let me just go back just in case. Okay, so you have the MLS screen up here. Yeah. And then I'm going to click on Transaction Desk. Now, there's a couple of different ways to get a couple of different program platforms where you can go ahead and get the contract from, but I'm going to show you using Transaction Desk. That's the one that I use all the time. It's one I'm most comfortable with. So let's get started. So I click on Transaction Desk, and of course I got that from signing into and logging into my MLS. And look at this, we've got an error. I have to say that I have never, ever seen an error before. I mean, maybe I've been logged in for too long and it kind of logged me out. So I'm going to refresh my screen, go back to Transaction Desk. And it looks like it's going to work. Okay, great. So here you're going to see a bunch of different boxes, as well as lots of forms and addresses and all kinds of things that are already done because I have been doing this for a little bit and I've got some transactions that I have saved in here. But just to review the 4 different boxes, the first one is your actual transactions. So this is when you create a transaction, which you do from this tab or box right here. The next section is called your forms section. This is where you can pull up individual forms. You can create forms that get added to the transaction specifically, or you can create a standalone form. Let's say you are going out door knocking and you want to bring a blank listing agreement with you. You can go to forms and just create a blank standalone form. Okay. Your next section down here is your signing section. So this is where you can basically look to see, has the contract been signed yet? Is it approved? You'll see here the status will show approved once your buyer has signed, or your seller if you're sending over a listing agreement. Here you could see this one that I did. We ended up having to redo it. I don't remember why, but this one shows in progress. So they never actually signed this one. I had to resend it and they ended up signing it later here. Okay. So that's where the statuses are. And then here are your documents. Now, this might be, basically like your contract, I guess similar to this here, but it's tied specifically to the actual address or the transaction. Okay. You may also have just some random stuff that gets saved here. Let's say I guess if you didn't save it or attach it to the transaction, I believe that's when it goes here. I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay, so let's get started. We are going to create a transaction. Here's the scenario. You have a buyer, they love a house, they want to put an offer in, and they're like, okay, let's do it. So you're like, okay, what do I do? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to this box over here, and you're going to click on it, and you're going to create a transaction. And what I always do when I create a transaction is I create I save it by typically by address. Now here you see a last name. That's actually my transaction coordinator's name, but typically I do save it as an address. So I'm going to go ahead and do 123 Sample Avenue. Okay, here's our sample address. The type of transaction, it's for this particular scenario that I've described, it's going to be a residential sale. So I'm going to type that. Now here is where, if you are part of Stellar MLS in Florida, you would be able to import all of the data, like the parcel ID, the address, the land description, all of that good stuff. You would be able to import it directly from the MLS by putting in the MLS number. Well, this is just a sample, so we're not going to be able to do that. But if we wanted to, I would click on this second one right here, Stellar MLS. And then when I click on it, I would be able to basically type in or copy and paste the MLS number in this box. And then I would list myself as the selling agent. I'm the one selling the property for the seller. Okay. So I'm the selling agent. I'm representing the buyer. But because this is just a sample, I'm going to go here to where it says select source, and I'm going to leave it like that. You can see this is optional, so you don't have to put something here, and you can put all of that information in manually. So I'm going to go to create. Now here on these next 5 steps, you see details step 1 of 5. This is not a place where you have to put information in, but I will say that the more information you have on these steps, the easier it is for you when you get to the end. So if I had put an MLS number, a lot of this on this screen right here would have auto-populated. And the things that would have auto-populated would have been the address, right? We would have seen 123 Sample Avenue. And I'm going to put my hometown as Lakeland, Florida. That would have auto-populated. My county is Polk. That would have auto-populated. My zip code 33813, that would have auto-populated. Here, the MLS number would have auto-populated. The year the house was built would have auto-populated. The tax number would have auto-populated. The legal description, which is huge, that's a long one, and you don't want to have to type that in because you don't want any inaccuracies, especially. So getting it directly from the source is always best. Now, speaking of source, if for some reason you do not have an MLS number, or maybe you're writing a contract for someone who's not in your MLS, so you don't have access to those details, you can go to the Polk County appraiser site or whatever county appraiser site is in your state. It doesn't even have to be Florida. Every county has one. And you can look up the property information and get the legal description using that website. Okay. And then you can copy and paste it in this box. Now going down here, it's not going to have all of the information necessarily. It may have the list price. I can't remember if that auto populates, but you can put in the purchase price. The purchase price is what price does the buyer want to offer. So let's say the purchase price is going to be $350,000. The deposit is going to be their earnest money deposit. That's their good faith deposit. The earnest money deposit typically runs about 1% of the purchase price of the house. Of course, if you want to be aggressive in your offer, maybe you're going to do 2%, right? Earnest money deposits are refundable if the buyer walks away during the inspection period, or if they do not get loan approval within the specified time indicated on the buyer contract. So this money, it is protected here in the state of Florida. I know other states, it can be a little bit sticky, but Florida is pretty, straightforward with how you get your money back, when you do, when you don't. So I'm going to, for just the sake of today, put 1% of the purchase price for the deposit. So that's going to be $3,500. Now, in this box, this is your total financing. This is how much of the loan is going to be financed. It has nothing to do with the earnest money deposit, nothing to do with anything else, just how much of the loan is being financed by a lender. So let's say this was a conventional loan. And let's say for the conventional loan, they're going to do 5% down. So that means 95% of the property is going to be financed. I don't believe it likes, yeah, it doesn't like percent signs. So I'm just going to put 95 there, right? And when I played with this initially, it took me a minute because I was like, okay, do I have to put a dollar amount? How do they know this is not $95 and it's 95%? But somehow it all works out. So I'll show you on the next couple of screens. So we're gonna go to step 2, and this is where we have like expiration date, offer date, application due date, commitment due date. I don't put all of these dates in. The only thing that I put in typically is the closing date. I could put that here. So let's say we're going to close on February 9th. Let's say the expiration date for this offer. Okay, we're going to submit this offer. Today's January 3rd, 2022. We're going to send this offer today to the listing agent. We want an answer by tomorrow. Okay, this is a seller's market. We don't want too much time to go by because we don't want too many other offers coming in. So we want answers quickly. That's it. That's all I'm going to put in this on this screen. So you can see I'm leaving a lot of blanks, and that's okay. I'm going to go to the next page. The next one is where I can put my contacts in. The contacts are going to be my buyers. So I can add here and I can create a new transaction contact. And I can type in their, what title they are. So they would be the buyer, right? I can put in their name, their email address, which is going to be very handy when it comes to having them sign digitally. I don't typically put anything in where it says preferred signature or preferred initials. And I do make sure this box is checked to add it to the address book. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm not going to put anything in there. So I'm going to close that out. But I would typically put all of the buyers. If there's 2 buyers, 3 buyers, 1 buyer, I would put all of their information there. I don't put seller information, nothing like that. So now I'm going to click next and I'm going to go to forms, and forms. This is where I can actually go ahead and pull up the different forms that I need. So it's important when you're pulling up your forms that you think about, okay, is this property in an HOA? What type of loan program is it? If it's in an HOA, you're going to need an addendum for that, right? An HOA disclosure. If the property is an FHA loan, you're going to need an FHA disclosure. If the property was built before 1978, you're going to need a lead-based paint addendum. So these are things and questions you want to ask yourself so that you can go ahead and pull up all of your forms right now. If you forget and you forgot to ask yourself one of those questions and you need it later, you can always go and get it later. That's not a problem. Okay. But for this sake, for this demonstration, we're going to say that this property is not in an HOA. We're going to keep this demonstration pretty simple. I'm going to show you what I'm doing right here is I'm typing in the words as is, because that's what I want to pull up. I want to pull up an as is residential contract for sale and purchase. So here we go. I've got my as is. Now I'm going to go back for a second and I'm just going to type in residential contract. So here you could see there is another residential contract for sale and purchase, but it does not say as is. There is a difference between the as is contract and this contract. One of the big differences are the timelines, the dates. With an as is contract, every single timeline, including your earnest money deposit, is on a calendar day timeline. In a regular contract that's not as is, the timelines, some of them are calendar days and some of them are business days. For example, the earnest money deposit is business days. So you do want to be aware of that. But I will say that most of the time when you're looking at listings in the comments, they will say, please use as is contract. Okay, so that's the one that we're going to use for this demonstration. I'm going to click that circle and I'm going to add it. Okay, now I want to go ahead and use a wire fraud notice. eXp Realty requires that we have a wire fraud notice. I'm also going to add, let's go ahead and do a lead paint form, a lead paint addendum. So this house was not an HOA, but it is an older house. So we are going to look for, so this is the warning statement addendum. This one is for rental housing. So this is the one that I want. Lead paint disclosure. I'm going to click on that. And that's it. That's all I got for this example. We're going to use these three forms. I'm going to click next. This is step 505 is the only thing where I don't do anything at all. And I'm just going to say done. And now what's going to happen is all of my forms that I just did are going to be in this section right here under the transaction dashboard. If I wanted to, I can go ahead and click on my first form, which is going to be my as is contract. But I want to go to the main dashboard just to show you where it's at. So number one, you can see that we created the transaction and 123 Sample Avenue showed up over here. So if I wanted to, I can click on that and get to this dashboard. So that's what we were just looking at. I'm going to go back again to the home screen. I can also look at the last three forms in this little section here, and it's going to be all of the forms that I just pulled up. So even for some reason, so you see here, there's a different address here. If I want to go here and pull it up, I can do that as well. It makes no difference at all. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to go back to this one. I'm going to click on the as is contract. Now, again, a lot of this information would have been pulled up. If for some reason you do not know the seller's information, you can pull that again from that Polk County property appraiser site or whatever county appraiser site you live in. You can type in the seller information by looking for it there. You can also obviously type in your buyer's name, which again, this would actually already be filled out for you during steps 1 to 5. And then when you pulled the MLS information. Legal description, again, if for some reason you didn't have it because you don't have access to the MLS, you can just copy and paste from that county's appraisal site. So this section here is important to talk about. This one is personal property that are included. Now it gives you sort of like the basics of what's included, and it mentions that the stuff that is included, excuse me, is going to be the range, oven, refrigerator, dishwasher, garbage disposal, ceiling fans, light fixtures, things like that we see when we're going through. Now, something that's not listed here is actually the washer and dryer. So if the washer and dryer is included with the listing, you're going to want to put that here. So as you could see, washer dryer, I'm going to just add that because in this sample, we're going to say that the washer and dryer was included with the listing. If there's something that's not included, now let's say there's a spa tub outside, okay, like one of those, standalone spa tubs. If that's not included with this listing, we want to make sure that we put that in there because we don't want the buyers to come back later and say, during the final walkthrough, where's that beautiful spa tub? We thought that was included. And you say, no, that wasn't included, and you can pull out the contract and show them that spa tub was not included. So it's really important when it's something that's able to be removed from the property that we specify in here that it is not included. Okay. Going down here, we're going to, I usually leave things blank unless I'm putting in a specific date. Like if I wanted to put this as 1 day or 5 days instead of the 3 days, that's the standard. I typically leave it blank, but you can fill in the number 3 if you wanted to. Keep in mind, I did tell you that the earnest money deposit is due within 3 calendar days. If the 3rd calendar day falls on a weekend or a holiday, then it automatically defaults to the next business day. Okay, that would be the 3rd day. The escrow agent name, that's the person who's actually holding the earnest money deposit. There are some companies, some title companies that will hold the earnest money deposit for your buyer, even if they're not the closing agent. But I just want to specify that the escrow agent name is not necessarily the closing agent's name, but in most cases it is. I have had one situation where the escrow agent name was different than the actual closing agent. Okay. So that was only one time out of many. So we're going to say that we're going to use United Title of Lakeland. The address, I have it already saved here because I use them often. And I'm going to type in their zip code. Oops, I'm going to type in Lakeland here. Now I can make this larger. And something that I want to bring to your attention that's really important is filling in these boxes. It drives me crazy when I'm on the listing side and I get contracts from buyer agents and this information is not filled in, because this is where your buyers are going to be referring to so that they know where to send this money. And we're asking them to fill out a wire fraud notice. And the reason why we do that also is because there's a lot of scammers out there. So there are scammers that will send emails, wiring instructions, looking and posing as a title company or as a brokerage, and they're not. So I always tell my buyers that the information where you need to wire money, the phone number of who you need to call is on the contract. And if you receive an email that has a different phone number or a different email, don't call the number within the email. Use your contract as your guide as to how to reach the title company. So really important to have the title company's phone number in here. Okay. And then of course the email address. So going back to this section right here, remember we had put in 95% was being financed. So take a look at this. Actually, it didn't work. So the 95 didn't go on. So that's interesting. Okay. So we have 350,000 for your purchase price. We have 3,500 for the earnest money deposit. Financing is here. In this box, it's easier to put it as a percentage. You can put it as a dollar amount, but who wants to do the math? Just use percentages whenever possible. So if you know that they're doing 5% down, you're going to do 95%. And here you would need to use the symbol. Okay. So 95% is now going to automatically calculate and change that bottom number to show what they're going to need to bring to closing for their down payment. This amount here is being subtracted from this amount, from the 5%. So that's leaving them with 14,000. This amount here does not include buyer closing costs, prepaids or prorations, and it states that here. Okay. So when it gets closer to closing, they'll actually get a settlement statement from the title company showing the amount they'll need to bring or to wire. That will include this amount plus their closing costs. So the closing costs are always we're not sure how much, but typically I tell my buyers that it's about 5% of the purchase price of the house is how much you can expect closing costs to be, approximately, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Okay. So now, and one more thing, going back to closing costs, you can always call the title company and ask them to run a net sheet for you so that you can give your buyer a more accurate amount of what the closing costs are going to be. Okay. So this is something, time for acceptance. So I had put that date. This is something that also didn't go through on those steps. So that's kind of interesting, but we had said we wanted them to accept by January 4th. The closing date did come through. I typed that in and it did work. And again, I'm not reading through all this. This is on for you guys to read through the contract and understand it, but I am just going to show you how to fill it out. If this was subject to a lease, if it was an investment property that somebody was buying that had tenants there, you would want to go ahead and check that box. Um, this one is if you were wholesaling and you were assigning this to like somebody else, you would check one of these boxes. But in most cases, you are checking this one that may not assign this contract. In box number 8 is where we are going to be talking about, or section number 8 is where we're going to discuss financing. So you're going to say whether or not this is a cash transaction or if it's contingent upon financing. So I'm going to check B because we said this was a conventional loan. So I'm going to check this. Now, this box is very, very important. I do typically leave it blank, even though it's important, because I'm defaulting to the 30 days. So from the effective date, if the contract becomes effective on January 4th, the buyers are closing February 9th. They must have loan approval within that 30-day period from the time the contract was effective. If they don't get loan approval and they get loan approval, or after, let's say 32 days go by and we still don't have loan approval, and then we find out on day 33 that they're not going to get loan approval and they have to walk, well, guess what? They lose their deposit. So that's one of those cases and situations where they can indeed lose their deposit. So you really want to make sure that the buyers, that you have a conversation with the lender, and if you're getting close to that 30-day mark and there still is not loan approval, you're going to want to address maybe doing an extension for loan approval or having your buyers withdraw from the contract because they don't have loan approval in time. So this is a very important conversation to have as you start getting closer to these number of days. Okay. Let's go down a little further here. This one, I have never had to fill this one out yet, so I'm not going to speak on that. This is a breakdown of closing costs, which your buyers and sellers do pay attention to when they see this. This is closing costs that are expected typically to be paid by the seller. And then of course, closing costs typically to be paid by the buyer. I do believe based on the area that you're in Florida, this could be a little bit different. I know like in our market, it's customary for the seller to select the title company, but then in other markets like down south, Miami, or any of those other southern Florida areas, it's customary for the buyer to select the title company. So just know your market and know what's customary to be paid for by who. This is your title, evidence, and insurance. I typically, again, leave this blank 15 days, but this is, again, another timeline that you want to make sure. Let's go to 8A. If it was a cash transaction, it is not 15 days. It's actually going to be 5 days. And the reason why is because cash deals typically close faster. They can actually close in 2 weeks. So why would we wait 15 days, right? So just keep that in mind. Going to the next one, this is where we talk about who's selecting the title company. Now, if you're representing a buyer and you're in a market where it's customary for the seller to select the title company, but you want to be aggressive in your offer, you can suggest that the buyer pay designate the closing agent and that they're going to pay for the owner's policy and charges. Now that usually runs about $1,500 to $2,000, just depending on the house and the situation. So that's a conversation that you have to discuss with your buyer, because that would be an added expense as part of their closing costs above that 5%, right, that we talked about. But typically it is the seller, and most of the times this is the box that I end up checking. If you're in the Miami area, you're going to obviously check this box. Survey, the buyer does pay for the survey, and that money is usually taken out at the table during closing. Home warranty, if your buyer is getting a warranty from the seller, depending on who's paying for what, you want to put that here. If a home warranty is not involved in the transaction, you can click NA. If the warranty is involved, you would want to say who the company is and what the dollar amount that is not going to exceed. Typically like $500 is what I would put there. Special assessments, I usually select A, that the seller is going to pay for installments that are due prior to closing, and the buyer will pay for installments due after closing. Disclosures, these are all of the disclosures that you should make your buyer aware of. You don't have to print out necessarily a separate document, but this is the statement. These are disclosure statements. In other states, they have actual documents for all of these that have to be printed out and filled out and signed. But in Florida, we just have to go over them like this. The only one that we have a separate one for is the lead-based paint one. Okay. Oh, and homeowners insurance. Actually, and FERPTA, if we have a seller that's from out of country. And we do have a seller disclosure. So my bad, we do have a couple of them. The first few we do not, but the last few we do. So the seller disclosure is your property disclosure that typically you will get from the MLS as an attachment. The property maintenance, we talk, this is just information for you to review. I'm not going to read through all this stuff. Your inspection period, typically if it's left blank, it's 15 days. This is one box that I never leave blank, especially in a strong seller's market. I typically try to be as competitive as possible. As you can see, I've done as little as 0 days, 5 days. Typically, I'm doing about 7 days though, on average. And my little trick, what I do to make sure that I could meet this deadline is I contact my home inspector at the time I'm submitting this offer. And I say, hey, when can you get out to such and such address? He tells me a day, a time. I say, fantastic. Even if my offer has not yet been accepted, I have him pencil it in. I pencil it in. I submit the offer. If it's not accepted, I call him back and cancel. If it is accepted, we're good to go. Okay. Plus, it's a little like manifesting, right? That you're saying your offer is going to be accepted because you've scheduled the home inspection and everything. Going to the next section. Let's see. Next section as far as what needs to be filled out. Getting down to the end here. Just to note, every single page of the contract should be initialed by your buyers. If you have 3 or 4 buyers, you just simply add additional initial blocks, not a big deal. All righty. Now here is where you're going to check if you did have any addendums. So in our case, I had a lead paint disclosure addendum. So I'm going to check that. Wire fraud is just a notice. It's not an addendum. So we don't have that. But there's many, many different addendums. And I encourage you that when you're filling out an offer to look at these to see if there's something that you should have printed out or included as a form. Seeing like you might look through this and say, sale of buyer's property. Oh yeah, my buyer is in the process of selling their house and this offer is contingent on that. So that would be a form that you would have to fill out. So go ahead and make sure you have that. This is the additional terms. You can put anything that you need here. If let's just say, for example, you needed, your buyer needed some assistance with closing costs. This would be an example of what you could put here. You can say a seller to pay up to 3% of buyer closing costs. Now, this is something to make a mental note of. Conventional loans will only allow up to 3% of closing costs assistance. FHA only allows up to 6% of closing cost assistance. I believe, and verify with your lender this, but if the buyer pays 20% down, then they can get up to 6% closing costs on a conventional loan. I think that's the case. So, but for sure, 100%, typically, if they're doing just like a 5% down on a conventional loan, only up to 3% of closing costs can be paid by the seller. On an FHA loan, VA loan, USDA loan, I believe all 3 of those is up to 6% seller assist for closing costs. Down here, your buyers are going to sign. Again, if you have 3 and 4 buyers, you can just squeeze them in over here. Not a big deal. I typically don't put in a buyer address. I did have one listing agent that sent it back to me asking me to put in a buyer address. And I was like, are you kidding me? But I did, whatever. But I typically don't, and nobody typically cares. And then that's it. That's everything that goes here. So you have, this is the cooperating sales associate, cooperating broker, that's us. The listing information will be put there once you upload everything from the MLS. Everything auto populates. Now we're going to go here and we're going to save this. Okay. If let's say you wanted to save this and you wanted to save it as a PDF because you wanted to send it to somebody, maybe to myself or to your mentor, to have them look over the contract to make sure it was done correctly, you can save it as a PDF and then go ahead and email it. All right. Now, since it's saved, I can go here to that main screen again, and I can click on my transaction, and then I can go to my next document. Okay, my next document is going to be the lead paint form. Now you can see I had typed in manually on the contract because nothing auto-populated because this is a sample, right? But I typed in sample name. So you can see that everything that I did type on the as-is contract automatically appeared on this, okay? So that's helpful. Your buyers just need to initial here, and then they have to initial, the buyers have to initial that they have received copies of all the information listed above. These are the like warning statements. There is a pamphlet in Transaction Desk that you can print out and send to them. This is the protect your home family, right? And then they have to say whether or not they received a 10-day opportunity to go ahead and do a risk assessment. There are home inspectors that will specifically look for lead paint so that if they don't want to trust what the seller is saying, they can get their own inspection, and they have a 10-day opportunity. That's aside from if their home inspection was just 7 days, if this box is checked, then they have 10 days to do that, okay? Or they can say that they waive the opportunity to do this because they're going by what the seller says here. Most of my buyers end up going for this. They usually don't want an added expense. If the seller says they have no knowledge of it, that's what they're going with. And then the licensee has to acknowledge here, you do as the selling agent, that I'm sorry, the licensee, this is the listing agent, not you. The listing agent has to say that they have informed the seller of their obligations in terms of lead paint. So the listing agent's going to initial here, buyers are going to initial here, and then the sellers are going to initial here. Now, typically, this form should have been as an attachment in the MLS, along with like HOA disclosures and things like that. But some listing agents don't fill it out. So you are responsible to make sure that this stuff is taken care of. I would not have your buyers sign anything here if this part has not been completed by the seller, okay? Never have your buyer sign, because what are they waiving if nothing has been filled out? You're gonna go, I said to the bottom here, your buyers are going to sign. Again, we're gonna go here, we're gonna save this transaction form. And we're gonna go to our last form, which is the wire fraud notice. And this did not auto-populate the sample name. Now we are representing only the client that's, with us on this form. So if we are representing the buyer or a seller, that's who we fill out. That's their information. If we're double ending it and we're basically representing both the buyer and the seller on the same home, same file, then we're going to have each party fill one of these out. Okay. So we don't care if the seller's agent is with Caldwell Banker. We don't worry about their names on this form. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this document here. And now I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to go to my transaction again. And I'm going to start off with my as is form. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little pen right here where it says send to Authentisign. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to go here to where it says new Authenticsign, because this one expires in 9 days. No point in showing you that. So we're going to send to the new one. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have the participants that you're going to want to add. Now, I'm not going to be able to really show you. Maybe I can add myself. Let's see. Let me actually exit out of there. Signers, add participant. I'm going to add from no, I can't add from the transaction. All right, we'll just do this. Remote signer, select. I'm going to add from contacts. I'm just going to add this person here as a buyer. He's actually my insurance guy, just to give you an example. And then I'm going to scroll here, and you could see his signing block. That's what we call it, a signing block, has automatically populated on the as is contract. Okay, on every single page. And then if we go down to the end, and you're going to see his signature as well has automatically auto-populated. Okay, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to click next. Oops. Who are they saying did not fill out? Oh, I guess my name. Okay, there we go. So because I put myself as the selling agent, it still wants my information there. So I'm going to click next. And now I can go ahead and click send, but I do need to make sure that I have all of my documents. So I'm going to go back up here to where it says docs, and I'm going to put add a document or a form. And I can go here and click add and then add. And when I do that, it gives me all of my documents, including my lead paint form and everything else I need. So now I can go ahead, I think, let's see. Yep. And I can go ahead and send this, but I'm not going to do it. Otherwise, my insurance guy is going to say, what house am I buying, Paula? But if I click send, then they will get it in their email, and you have completed your very first contract. Okay. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can message me here on YouTube, or you can reach me direct at 863-286-0822. Again, I am in Florida. This is a Florida as is contract. I am not an attorney. I'm not giving any legal advice about the contract, just showing you how to fill out the basics of it. Okay. See you guys on the next one.